If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Please, let me explain. 1, it is free. 2, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from the phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many others. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So please, download the free Anchor app and go to anchor.fm and get started today.
The Ear, Evangelical and Reformed Christian Podcast. Welcome to The Ear, the Evangelical and Reformed, a Christian podcast that urges you to think deeper and draws you closer to God through faith. Through powerful sermons, teaching segments, and discussions, The Ear hopes to give you a different perspective on secular topics from a Christian worldview. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Please welcome your host, Brandon Queen.
There we go. Well, good afternoon, podcast world, and welcome to the 5th week of, you got it. What's this thing called again? I forget. No, I'm just playing. It's the way forward. We are on week 5, and week 5 is entitled. What is week 5 entitled?
Men need camaraderie. So we've talked about captivation. We've talked about clarity. We are in the midst of trying to think about those traits that you see in men that have a dynamic spiritual life. And so giving men a kind of not a lifelong goal, but kind of a shorter term horizon. What should you aspire to? What's the kind of man that, over the next year, 2-3 years, you could grow into? That's what we're describing. So this third trait is that men need camaraderie. And that's what we think about tonight.
Yeah. Joe, are you aware that we are literally at the halfway mark with this series? Week 5? We got 5 more episodes left. I
know. And what I'm like using this to measure like quarantined time. So it's like, whoa, like this has been going on for a while.
Yeah. Cause I think when we first started, it was the first week of quarantine. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Because I remember telling you I wanted to do a couple of these in person, but that never happened.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Distant memories.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and dive on into this week's questions. So my first question for you, Joe, is what's the difference between spiritual friendship and other forms of friendship?
Yeah. So again, thinking here about camaraderie, spiritual friendship. Friendship's a category that people used to think more about. So you can go all the way back to old, like Greek and Roman thinkers, guys like Aristotle, Cicero. They used to write books on friendship, and they would describe different types. Now, I think when most Americans think of friendship, they think of like one thing, one category. But what we need to do is break it down. So I'll give you some different categories of friendship, and we'll try to distinguish spiritual from the other types. So one would be friendships based on utility or usefulness. So here, think of your work colleagues. You see them every day. You talk to each other. But truth be told, if somebody transferred their job, you probably never speak to them again in many cases, right? So you've got those kinds of friends. You've got friendships based on enjoyment. So a classic example of this is golf friends. Every weekend you play golf together, play tennis together, go play basketball together, whatever. But it's that activity that keeps you together. And if somebody got hurt and stopped showing up, you don't really hear about them anymore. So that's another type. A third type would be just friendships of kind of memory or affection. So high school buddies, you get together, you have lots of fun, you reminisce. But if you're not reminiscing, there's really nothing else to talk about. So, there's all of these types, but what these older thinkers would also describe is friendship based on the good life. And what they meant by that was when people have a shared destination, then what they're able to do is help each other grow toward whatever that standard of excellence is. And so with spiritual friendship, we're kind of taking that idea and we're bringing it into the house of discipleship. So these are friendships that are deliberately and intentionally focused on helping one another grow into the likeness of Jesus. And, probably the best picture, if you're thinking of just like a everyday picture, is if you think of athletes. You cannot find a sport, an Olympic sport, where athletes train alone. Even if you're a sprinter, doing your own race, you go find some of the other sprinters that run the same race and you train with them. And athletes know that by doing that, they actually bring out the best in one another. And so again, that's the kind of idea. It's what you get in Pilgrim's Progress, people on a shared journey that can help each other through the difficulties, over the mountains, and get to the ultimate destination, which is into the presence of God together. That's what we're after.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like with work, I got people that are in my corner pushing me forward and trying to get me trained to where I can do my job effectively. So it's, and it's funny because I was going to ask you to kind of throw in the athletic side to this whole Bible study, and you just did. So I didn't have to ask. Thanks for reading my mind. However, now when you say spiritual friendships versus other forms of friendship, now you kind of broke it down fairly well, but let's go back to the spiritual friendship. And I want to add, if we are men of God, then we have to do several things, like hold each other accountable. We have to disciple, or our favorite word is persevere with that person, no matter what they're going through. So it's our job to be that strength for our brother in Christ. For example, my roommate, both of us are Christian. He struggle, I struggle. We try to help each other as best as we can. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. But that's the joy of having a spiritual brother in Christ.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's it. You're in the game together, right? I mean, we're all thrown into it, but these are relationships that have to be intentionally pursued, because they'll hit a ceiling on their own unless we find ways of deepening and enriching them, especially as men.
Yeah. Now, what is the biblical background for spiritual friendship?
Go ahead.
I was going to ask the second part of that question, but I'll wait. So what is the biblical background of spiritual friendship?
Yeah. So I'll throw out a few verses at you. So first from the Proverbs, Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed." Now, this is something you can find a lot of material in psychology right now that affirms the same point. This idea that so much of who we become is at an unconscious level, that the people we're around are contagious. They rub off on us. And so, the proverb says right here is that you want to be a wise man, and it's not just wisdom. You want to be a courageous man. You want to be a student of the Bible. You want to be a man of prayer. One of the best things we can do is not sit down and think, how do I do this on my own? A better plan is actually to surround yourself with guys that have the characteristic you want, and it'll rub off on you. It's contagious. So, there's one principle we see in the Proverbs. Throw out a couple other verses at you. So here's Proverbs 18:1. It says, "A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment." Here we're hitting against the deceitfulness of the human heart. One of the problems with sin is guys who are falling into dangerous patterns, they often don't see it. Hebrews talks about beware of the deceitfulness, the hardening of your own heart. And if we're just going to trust our instincts are going to fail us. And so the Proverbs here is describing a man who's isolating himself because he doesn't want anybody else's point of view. He doesn't want to be caught, right? And, guys do this all the time, especially with when you see breakdown of a marriage. They begin to separate themselves from the voices of accountability so they can justify their behavior. And the best thing we can do to stop that is early on, proactively, have other men in our life who will see it when we don't see it, point it out to us, and, hit us over the head before we do something that really hurts us and somebody else. So, and I'll throw one more. So this is probably, we could go elsewhere. Jesus has some great things to say about spiritual friendship in John 15. but a passage guys need to know about because this is as practical as it gets. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9 to 12. And I'll read it to you. There's 3 really big ideas that are so critical that are highlighted right here. So it says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not easily broken. So, guys, why should you have these close relationships with other men, willing to hold you accountable, support you? 3 reasons right here. 1, if you're alone and fall down, you got no one to pick you up. And part of being a Christian, it is stumbling on our own feet, right? Stumbling on the traps that are set. And we all need somebody who can lift us up when we're on the ground and can't lift ourselves. Talks about if you try to keep yourself warm, if you try to keep the pace of a spiritual life, if you try to keep yourself motivated for prayer or for even just showing up at church or for committing to small group, eventually that motivation is going to wane. You put yourself around other people, they'll help you stay warm. And then the third thing is, look, it says, 1 may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand it. You know, we've already talked in prior weeks about the devil prowling like a roaring lion. You know, let's not face that lion on our own if we don't have to. If we do it together, we can withstand temptation that left to ourselves, we might fall prey to. So there you go. There's some biblical context to this idea of the importance of setting ourselves in close relationships with other men.
Absolutely. All right. Now, let me ask the second part of that question. So where do we see this idea in the Bible? And I think you just gave us that. So let me revamp that question and say, how does a man look for the answers that you just gave us in the Bible without obviously using the verses you just gave us?
Yeah. You know, I think men, let's just begin by saying we need this. This is vital. We've laid out some groundwork for it. It's implicit in a lot of the teaching of the New Testament. When you look at the kinds of relationships that the one anothering, we'd love to see that in all of our relationships with brothers and sisters in Christ. But truth be told, a lot of that stuff, when you talk about confessing your sin to one another, really admonishing one another, you can't just do that without a fairly deep relationship. And so we're moving beyond a kind of casual to a realm where you really feel you can trust yourself to others and you're willing to listen to their point of view, even if it hurts. So that's where we're trying to drive the conversation.
Have to write that point down. All right. So how is the spiritual friendship different from being a part of a small group? Bible study or one-to-one discipleship relationship? How does all that work?
Yeah. If you look at what most churches are trying to structure within their congregation, you've always got the big, large group, which you always need to have. But beyond that, there are house groups or some sort of community group. And then, you've got one-to-one discipleship relationships. We've got one more mature person walking with a less mature. What's different about this is it's really among kind of equals. It's not so much a relationship, an asymmetrical relationship where one person's kind of in a position of being the discipler, the other one is the more receptive. It's more like, again, a bunch of guys who are just pursuing the same objective. And where that's important is I think often, take community groups, for example, they try to accomplish more than they're able to. So you can find endless churches that are trying to get people to be vulnerable. They're trying to get them to be, confess their struggles. But, if you've got 8 to 10 people that you really don't know that well, male, female, all different stages, often those aren't settings that guys are really able to unload on. And so again, this is what's different is we're talking about guys who, they might, that they're really on a shared road, and they're trying to seek out a degree of trust where they can have that vulnerability, where they can